Trump's envoy Witkoff, satisfied with Davos talks with Ukrainians, notes progress and commends Zelenskyy. We'll talk about this with Andreas Umland, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies in the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Andreas, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
Andreas, yes, President Special Envoy Witkoff announced that he plans to visit Kiev in the near future. In response to a question from journalists from a Ukrainian media outlet about possible dates for his visit to Ukraine, he replied, soon. What impact could this visit have on Ukrainian relations, in your opinion, and your own thoughts?
I hope, of course, for the best that indeed something can be achieved and some compromise that is acceptable for Ukraine be found. But I'm skeptical that this is possible because all this shuttle diplomacy is now already lasting for almost a year. And what has come out of it is an increase of the Russian attacks on Ukraine and an increase of civilian victims of these attacks. And no ceasefire is in sight. There is a lot of talk about allegedly only a couple of points being so far undecided, but I'm skeptical that this will really create actually a real ceasefire. Maybe some document will be signed, but for now I don't believe that something materially will change.
But it is worth recalling that Witkoff previously stated he is scheduled to meet with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. According to him, the meeting was initiated by the Russian side. Witkoff has already visited Moscow multiple times and met with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, despite statements from Washington officials claiming that Russia is allegedly ready for peace. There are no signs of this. Could such a meeting lead to tangible changes on the battlefield and not only?
What I suspect Russia is now trying to do is basically instrumentalize the Trump administration to get territory that the Russian army is unable to conquer. And here, the most embarrassing part is that a large chunk of the Donetsk basin, better known as the Donbass, has not yet been conquered by Russia, in spite of 11 years now, this war lasting in the Donbass and Russia trying to get these remaining parts of the Donbass. And I guess Witkoff will try to persuade Zelenskyy to give away these territories under the assumption that this would then end the war. But we know already Russia's behavior in these negotiations. It's trying to pressure the other side into something that is unacceptable, and then Russia itself does not fulfill the conditions of the agreement. That was the case with the two Minsk agreements, or what happened 2008 in with regard to Georgia and the occupied territories in the Tskhinvali region and Abkhazia. So I don't believe yet in something coming out of it, although I do hope, of course, for a ceasefire.
Andreas, and separately in Davos, discussions were held on security guarantees for Ukraine, the potential establishment of a duty-free economic zone, and continued support from the West. Ukrainian and US negotiators assess the process positively and continue consultations. As you mentioned, let's start with the economic zone. How do you envision it, and could this duty-free zone help Ukraine with economic development? What risks or challenges could arise during the implementation of this initiative?
To me, it sounds all a bit fantastic because we are talking here about a land in war and about a very unstable security situation where a new escalation can happen every day, where everybody knows that both sides are unhappy with the current state of affairs and where Russia wants to get more territory, for instance, the remaining parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts, which according to the Russian constitution are parts of Russia, and where, of course, Ukraine is also unhappy. So whether there's a duty-free zone or a zone with duties, I think will change very little. This is an approach by business people, and that's the background of people like Trump and Witkoff, and they seem to have little understanding about how these ceasefires can function and how one can move from war to peace, to a stable peace. These economic instruments are perhaps last in line. They come after you have resolved the security issues, but to resolve the security issues is difficult if you don't really invest into stabilizing the security situation.
And regarding security guarantees, Ukraine expects to sign a framework document on security guarantees with the United States shortly after the Davos summit. What stage are we currently at regarding US guarantees? So what can they offer us? At the same time, it remains unclear which proposals developed by Ukraine and its Western allies might be accepted by Moscow, if any at all.
I think these negotiations that Ukraine is conducting with the US are useful by themselves, and to keep the topic on the agenda. And if a document can then be signed that creates obligations for the US concerning Ukraine, that would be great. I'm not sure that this will that much on the ground, because I can't really imagine Russia agreeing to a ceasefire, which would then rapidly increase or improve the security situation of Ukraine. That is not in the interest of Russia. Russia wants an insecure Ukraine or no Ukraine at all. And therefore, these efforts of Kiev are right and good and should continue. But I don't think that will eventually lead to anything. What is needed is not so much all this shuttle diplomacy and negotiations. What is needed are measures to pressure Russia, either on the battlefield or in the economic field, or in the best case in both of these fields, or on the front line and via sanctions.
Andreas, Financial Times reports one of the reasons the prosperity plan between Ukraine and the US may not be signed in Davos in America's desire to hear Putin first. According to the newspaper, the signing is currently not planned due to disagreements between European capitals and Washington regarding Greenland, as well as the peace council proposed by Trump. One official told journalists that another factor behind the decision not to approve the prosperity plan was Russia's refusal to signal a willingness to agree to the 20-point peace plan developed by the US with the participation of Ukraine and Europe. What do you think about this?
I think Ukraine is the party in all of this that is most interested in a ceasefire, and Ukraine will also go for certain compromises. And we have already seen over the last year a significant softening of the Ukrainian position, in that the current front line would be accepted as the future contact line in a ceasefire, or that the accession of Ukraine to NATO would be delayed to an unspecified future date. These are already for Ukraine difficult decisions, because they undermine the territorial integrity of Ukraine and they undermine the national sovereignty of Ukraine. But Ukraine wants and needs this ceasefire. I've just been in Kiev and am there every month, and I know how much the people suffer from this war, and the war is often, in many ways, not actually a war as you imagine it. It's a terror campaign against civilians, targeting the weak, the children, the sick, the elderly, who suffer, of course, most under the current Russian attacks on the energy infrastructure and all the repercussion this has for daily life.
And a new statement also came from Kit Kellogg, who emphasized that the war could end this summer, before August 24th, when Ukraine celebrates Independence Day. Why are deadlines and dates being announced? What is the basis for the prediction that the war could end by August 24th, in your opinion?
These predictions are probably designed to create a certain hope within the different sides in the in the Ukrainian population, and to to set certain dates and then maybe work towards these dates. I think so far, alas, this is all speculation, because that is decided within the Kremlin, and the Kremlin needs to be pressured, as I mentioned already, much more in order to change its position.
And we saw that Donald Trump signed the statute of the Peace Council and stated we're going to establish peace around the world. The war in Ukraine will soon end. It is now an official international organization under Trump's leadership. What criticisms or risks exist for creating such an organization under Trump's leadership?
Yeah, this is a new idea that is surprising and apparently goes far beyond the Gaza context. It's apparently an organization that Trump wants to create for himself, where he also poses himself as a private person and not as the president of the US. He will leave at some point this post. And what all of this means is so far incomprehensible. Apparently, Trump is trying to create a sort of alternative mini United Nations, where he would then be the president of this organization. It's a bizarre idea, and I can't imagine that something will come out of it.
And Andreas, Trump explained why he invited Putin to the Peace Council. He said, we need everyone. Yes, there are controversial figures, but these are people who can get results. These are people with enormous influence. If the council consists only of do-nothings, it won't be very useful. The Peace Council will accomplish much of what the UN should have done. We will work with the UN, Trump said, but the Peace Council will be special. How and on what could Putin's participation in the Peace Council have an impact?
Yes, if Russia joins this Peace Council, that would be obviously designed to exert, to influence Trump, and to then instrumentalize this Peace Council for Russia's imperialist aims. Still, I think it's such a bizarre idea, and also the countries that have so far agreed to join this Peace Council are not the most relevant ones, and they are a group of largely accidental nations around the world that have joined this idea of Trump. So I could imagine that if Russia joins it, Belarus has already joined this initiative, that could be then an instrument for Putin to exert influence on Trump, and that would then be a problem.
And let's talk a little more about NATO security. Finnish intelligence believes that the Russian regime will continue its attempts to attack and damage critical infrastructure in NATO countries, in the Baltic Sea, as Russia has done in recent years. Russia denies involvement in these incidents, but it is clear that the Kremlin is lying. Recently, the number of incidents has increased not only at sea in the Baltic, but also on land in the Baltic region. How is NATO preparing to counter potential Russian attacks in the region?
Over the last year, I would say the seriousness with which the member countries of NATO and the organization of NATO have looked on the security of the so-called Eastern flank, including the Baltic countries and the Baltic Sea, has increased. There's now a much better understanding that an escalation that could lead to a war between NATO and Russia can happen, and that NATO really needs to prepare for this worst case scenario. These bad news are in a way good news, because the thinkers now, the think tankers, the experts, the diplomats, the politicians, not only in the Central East European countries, but also in West European countries, in continental West European countries, have changed their attitude towards these security issues, and there is now more and more preparation for a worst case. A colleague of mine at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies has, by the way, suggested, Frederick Wesslau is his name, that the Baltic states may be interested in the future to get security guarantees not only from NATO, but also from Ukraine, because Ukraine has unique experience in fighting Russia. Russia is the main problem for these Baltic republics, and therefore it looks logical that they could seek support from Ukraine, and maybe even first of all from Ukraine, and only secondarily from NATO in a possible defense against Russia.
Andreas, and in your opinion, could these incidents escalate into a broader conflict between Russia and NATO?
For the time being, I don't think so, because Russia will not open a second front as long as the Russo-Ukrainian war continues. That would be in a way in the interest of Ukraine if such a second front in the Baltic region would open. So these are now provocations, escalations by Russia that are designed to make West European, especially West European countries nervous, and to exert psychological pressure, and to say increase the stakes. But for now, I think the NATO can actually very robustly respond to these Russian provocations, and should actually react in an equivalent way and basically do the same things to Russia as that Russia is doing to various NATO member countries. Because, as I said, the likelihood that Russia would now engage in a military operation in the Baltics is low, because that would be an enormous strain on Russia to fight two wars in Ukraine and in the Baltic region. Once a ceasefire is achieved between Russia and Ukraine, then I think the situation changes rapidly, radically, because then Russia will have basically a huge army, a militarized society, a militarized economy that, so to say, has nothing to do anymore. And then the risk of escalation in the Baltic region and the Caucasus, in Central Asia, will rapidly rise.
Andreas, we hope to avoid a large-scale NATO conflict with Russia. We hope that there will not be a major NATO war with Russia. Thank you so much for this important conversation. Thanks for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Andreas Umland, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies in the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, was with us today. Please share this interview and continue supporting Ukraine. Thanks a lot, and see you.
Thank you. And thanks for having me again.